certainly did.
Yeah.
One last thing. We got a Patreon account. They're our top supporters, been with us since the beginning.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, and neither would you be.
Right.
And so one of the things I do is I offer them a opportunity to ask each guest a question.
Yeah.
And we had a ton of questions.
Really?
Yes, for you, but I narrowed it down to one. This is from Tori Miller. Since your last interview with Shawn and the interviews with Legend and Commander Massoud, do you think we will have to go back to Afghanistan to fight the Taliban? If so, do you believe since our botched withdrawal that our relationship with partner forces and other tribes are now strained?
Man,
I thought this was a great question because we've talked
two-part
about
question,
this.
right? That's a great question. So yes, I do think that we will have to go back, and my logic behind it is that the reemergence of international terrorism out of that safe haven is so profound that everything that we're seeing from multiple very credible sources is saying that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I'm sure you and I'll talk more about this, but they are in such advanced stages that those operatives are already here, right? So when it gets to that point, it is very difficult to stop it. What I believe is we unfortunately have a very short memory in this country. You know, when you look at 9/11 happened just over 20 years ago, and you remember where the country was in those smoldering ruins and how we felt during that. There was this collective simmering anger of just retribution, and they turned guys like you and me and our units loose in Afghanistan for retribution. I mean, President Bush, said it from the pile with the megaphone. He said, they're going to hear from us real soon. And it was a pursuit of justice, right? And you had the yellow ribbons come out and the Budweiser commercials, and everybody was fired up, and we were a nation that at war, and we deployed a very small percentage of these young men and women into a country that frankly had been at war for 4 decades. Like, that's all that country knows is war. And what's interesting though is you think about Osama Bin Laden quietly killed Massoud's daddy, Ahmed Shah Massoud, 2 days prior, because he knew that was exactly what we were going to do.
Yeah.
And he knew that we would go to Panjshir and that we would partner with Massoud. And he had the foresight, the strategic foresight, to whack the resistance leader 48 hours before dropping through strategic surprise the Twin Towers, hitting the Pentagon, and would have hit the Capitol. So think about that for a second. This was over 20 years ago. This was the level of strategic breadth and depth that Al-Qaeda possessed, okay? Today, through your interview with Sarah Adams and others, it's excruciatingly clear that they have far surpassed that capability today, not just in terms of fighters, but in their sophistication. They're operating at a whole different level now. And so they want us in the fight. The enemy has a vote. They want us to respond. We may be done with Afghanistan, but they're not done with us. It's not done with us. And so what you can bet on is that they are going to outdo the last attack, and they are going to do it at such a level of emotional impact that we will have no choice but to respond, because it's going to take us into a sympathetic state of retribution.
Yeah.
And there will be outcries for payback. And all of these folks that have written checks to the Taliban and done all these ill-advised policy moves, they'll just skulk back into the shadows. They'll disappear. And the Budweiser commercials will hit again, the country music songs, the yellow ribbons will come out, except this time it'll be my kid, maybe yours, on C-17s. I think it'll be sooner than when yours would be ready to go, but it certainly could be mine and other people watching this. It could be our kids on those C-17s, and I think that they will go. The difference takes me to the second part of the question. I did a scene at the end of Last Out in Tampa that had never been done before in my play, where we actually turned the lights down at the end of the play, and we had Danny Patton, the Green Beret's son, Caden, like we heard this blackout sounds of the country's been attacked, and this is at the end of the play, and it says, America is now responding. We think there are troops heading to Afghanistan. And as the lights come up, Danny's son, Caden, is now full kitted up. He's now a Green Beret, and he's rolling his parachute up. And stepping out of the shadows is a commando in tattered rags. He's got an M4 tricked out and all of the patches that he once wore, but it's all ripped up to shreds, and he's got his weapon leveled right at Caden. And Caden just looks up at him, and there's this standoff between these two in this moment. And then we drop the lights, because that is what our kids are going to walk into. They're not going to walk into the reception, I believe, of a resistance that is waiting anxiously for them to get there. And, you're going to have this link up of unconventional warfare. I think what you're going to have are thousands of pissed off commandos and special forces and interpreters who are left behind, who've lost their families, who've been co-opted in many cases by bad actors. And the very organizations that we trained that would have been the vanguard are now going to be probably who we have to deal with face to face. And I'm not saying we can't, I'm not saying we won't, but it is a completely different scenario this time because we wholesale abandoned a partner force that has, to this day, 3 years later, is still being hunted. And to think that we could just walk back into that country and say, hey, we're back, how you like me so far? It's not going to go down that way.
I've learned so much history from putting these interviews together with you, and I've learned a ton of information. And one of the things that just, that sticks out to me that I say on every news interview, every time we talk about this now, I say it. You told me 9/11 was a $500,000 budget.
Yep.
Now the government has come out and publicly said that they have accidentally given them $239 million. We know it's more than that.
Yeah, that's a conservative estimate.
But we know it's 40 to 87 million a week.
Absolutely.
But even if it was just $239 million, well, that is what, 480 times? 478 times the budget that they had on 9/11.
Yeah, and they're 10x bigger, probably close to 80,000 fighters. I think they had something like a couple thousand before 9/11. I'll have to check those numbers. And don't forget, too, they just had a couple of operating bases in Afghanistan at that time. You had Tarnak Farms, which is near Kandahar Airfield, and a few others. But you've got every NATO base that we built over there. Camp Brown, you've got Bagram, you've got Bastion, all of the infrastructure, all of that was just left behind. And so they've rolled right in on these bases with well-designed training areas and ranges. And they are training at a level that's unprecedented, and you think about that, the advent of technology that is accessible to them now. Think about the proliferation of drone technology that we're seeing coming off the battlefield in Ukraine. I mean, how fast has that advanced? Yeah. And we already see that the attack in Russia at the theater, October 7 by Hamas in Israel, these are all local distributed attacks of horrorism. Horrific attacks, not World Trade Center type things, but where we live, work, and play, right? And what I keep going back to is whether it's ISIS-K, whether it's the Al-Qaeda, the thing that we know is they love to outdo the last attack. They're not going to be casual about the next one. They're going to make it a point to make it bigger and more spectacular and more paralyzing than the last one. And what I've heard Sarah and others say is that all indications are that they have trained heavily in close quarters battle, local distributed attacks, and that there's a very good chance that the next thing we see on the homeland could be an October 7 style house to house, restaurant to restaurant, synagogue to chapel kind of attack on a massive scale. Now you think about what would happen if you had an October 7 style attack in Houston, Akron, Youngstown, Dallas, Miami, all at the same time. I mean, what did the DC snipers do? I mean, think about that. You talk about a $500K budget. Like the DC snipers shot out of the back of a car and shut down the Beltway for weeks. Imagine the systemic paralysis that would result from an October 7 style attack across 6 cities at the same time.
I mean, we know what that looks like. You know, I want to say something. I think sometimes I feel like some of the information that we're talking about seems a little out there, or maybe not out there because it's all happening, but it's hard for everyday Americans who have zero combat experience and are just going to work and getting by the day and not really. They're coming after you.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that we've learned being overseas, you know, I think a lot of people think they're going to hit a military base.
Yeah.
They're going to hit a police station. They're looking for a fight. They're not looking for a fight. They are looking for the easiest target with the most casualties that is going to get on the news.
Yeah.
And where do we learn this from? We learn this from their tactics overseas. What do they hit? They hit markets. They hit mosques. They hit public places where there is little to no police or military. And that's what they're going to hit here. They're not coming after you because you're a hard target. They're not coming after me. They're coming after mom and her kids and dad that goes to his office job every day. That's who they're coming after.
Yeah.
You people better start paying attention to what the fuck is going on, because this shit is going to happen.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. This isn't a political thing. This is a country with zero borders. They've already caught people. They have no idea how many people have come across already. And this is how these organizations operate. And one other thing, these organizations are not competing against each other anymore. Now it's 21 terrorist organizations working together, training together in Afghanistan with one common goal, and that is us.
Yeah, and that's well said. And, you know, they've broken through barriers, even the Shia-Sunni barrier, you know, where Iran is very complicit in their work with al-Qaeda. We're looking at an unprecedented level of collaboration between state and non-state actors, also Shia and Sunni. That was, you know, you didn't see that prior to 9/11, on certainly not on this scale, where Iran is offering sanctuary and resource support to al-Qaeda, who is a Sunni-based organization, and, you know, Iran is Shia. And then you add to that, Shawn, you know, the part that you're dealing with a meta-narrative here. This is a narrative that, you know, ends with the establishment of a caliphate in the West. And this
What is a caliphate?
This is basically a swath of territory that is governed by Islamic law. You know, it is an Islamist objective to occupy and govern through Sharia law. You know, and it's administered by what they call a caliphate, and it goes way back centuries to, you know, periods of Islamic expansion. And this is not, I want to be clear, you know, I'm not saying that this is necessarily an Islamic narrative. It is an Islamist narrative. And I think that's really important to clarify here, because what we're talking about are very specific groups who maintain this very radical ideology that at all costs they will expand this caliphate of Sharia-governed territory into the West. And in order to do that, all forms of governance that are in existence today and ways of life must go. They cannot coexist, you know. And so that level of commitment, plus they've already demonstrated through precedents their willingness to hit us right in the chest cavity. They want us in the fight. They need us to be in the fight, because that's how they bleed you from 1,000 cuts. So they're coming. They're not afraid of our military might. They're not intimidated at all. And then the other piece that, to your original point, and I think this is really important to hash out, you talked about, like, when you hear some of these things that Sarah talks about, or Legend, or me, it's easy to go, well, okay, you guys were veterans, you fought in the war's over, you know, let's move on. You know, because if there was a problem, the 3-letter agencies would be talking about it, or the administration. But here's the thing, and this is really important to unpack. When Afghanistan collapsed in 2021, right, or even go back to 9/11, when 9/11 happened, the worst terror attack in our nation's history, as a nation collectively, we said never again. It hit us so deeply that it was clear there was no really on-the-ground intelligence capability that could have gotten in front of this, because we had indications. And there was no ground strike capability. We weren't partnered with the Northern Alliance. There was no partner force in the country. So we didn't really have any ability to strike. All we had was over the horizon. Sound familiar? So for 20 years, as a nation, we invested, and as NATO, we invested in building an intelligence apparatus that would prevent another safe haven and deep strike on the states, and a partner force that could be the antibody to violent extremism in that safe haven. And we did both. We built those. We bled for them. We lost friends for them. We gave up our youth for that. And then on August 15th, 2021, an administration literally turned the page on that like it never even happened, like it was a ServPro commercial. And we walked away from 30,000 commandos. You know, we abandoned 98% of our human intelligence and just left it behind. And then we decided that we would deal with the Taliban as a legitimate state actor. And we would pay them humanitarian resources and counter-terror dollars to go after ISIS, because somehow we feel like they can actually target them and they're at odds. But so in doing that, what we actually did, and then these veterans groups from all over the country, there were hundreds of them. Pineapple was one of many. But we picked up the phone. And we answered the phone when the government didn't, and nobody was coming in. We were talking to intelligence operatives. We were talking to Afghan commandos and special forces members who had nowhere else to go. And these veterans, Shawn, they never hung up the phone. They never hung up the phone in 3 years. They've cashed in their 401ks for safe houses. They've cashed in their kids' college funds to pay for food drops, because these commandos and special forces and intel operatives, they can't show their face in public. Right? So they've kept them alive, and they've stayed on the phone with them. So when you have people like Sarah Adams, her network in that country is amazing. And the people that she's talking to are normally the people who'd be talking to three-letter agencies. But guess what? They don't trust those three-letter agencies at all. And those three-letter agencies and our administration clearly is not interested. I mean, we asked Masood, are you talking to any? Nope. And so, as weird as it is, and as strange as it is, and it's like the Twilight Zone. I believe the GWAT generation, specific veterans and intelligence pros in that generation, have more high fidelity information about what's coming to the homeland than our own government.
Yeah.
And so it's not far-fetched.
Why do you think they've not made any big moves visibly yet? Why have we not seen an attack yet? What's your?
If I put my unconventional warfare hat on, I'm going to take infiltration as long as you give it to me.
I was gonna say the same thing. So I want to break that down a little bit more. And we have the question I would be asking myself is, why would we attack now?
Yeah.
Let's war game it. Let's see I think this about China. I think this about a lot of our adversaries. Why would you formulate an attack right now when the going's so good?
Yeah.
This isn't a joke. This isn't over embellished. The borders are wide open. We know Legend has been talking about this passport issue, how they are printing legitimate passports out and handing them out to as many terrorists as they possibly can to get them into South Central America and have them funnel up through the southern border. And so as long as that border is wide open and nobody in America is paying attention, why would they attack now? Why wouldn't they just keep, hey, let's train some more guys up, get them passports, have them infiltrate into the U.S. Going still good, get some more trained up, get them passports, get them in there. Get as many of these terrorists into the United States as we possibly can, and then if they ever do actually secure that border, that's go time.
Yeah, I think that's,
Hundreds of thousands of terrorists inside the United States just waiting for the go-ahead.
I mean, it's certainly a very large number of bad actors have made it into this country. And I would say not only Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K type operatives, but you're also looking at state actors. You're looking at China, Russia, Iran. All of these state actors have unconventional warfare mandates, right? You know, so Green Berets are your guerrilla warfare, unconventional warfare component of the SOF community. But there's other countries that have that same kind of thing. So imagine that. Imagine that subversion, sabotage operatives have made their way into the country that are not just non-state actors like Al-Qaeda, but state actors. And is it far-fetched to think that there's actually collaboration between them? Right, and I think there could be. I mean, certainly look at what's going on, for example, with Iran and the Taliban, and Iran and Al-Qaeda. There is clearly a symbiotic relationship that was not there before, and so there's that. Then I wind it back to look at what's happening in Afghanistan. That people are. I don't know why no one's talking about this, but the Al-Qaeda 2.0 book that just came out verifies what Sarah has been saying, verifies what Legend has been saying. 3 independent sources are saying that Hamza Bin Laden is alive. He was not killed under the Trump administration. He is alive. He is the emir of Al-Qaeda, which means the brand is back. The Bin Ladens are back. That matters to donations. It matters to how they are perceived to the Islamic Ummah. Like, it is a big, stinking deal. He is in Afghanistan. Why would Osama bin Laden's son be in Afghanistan? What possible reason could he be there if for nothing other than retribution? He is married to the daughter of Mullah Omar, the former commander of the faithful of the Taliban, to the daughter of Haqqani, and to the daughter of Ayman Zawahiri. So
Can
if
you go into who those are?
And so those are so the Haqqani network, right? Is a massive network in Afghanistan that's part of the Taliban, but also kind of an independent network that really were very connected to Osama bin Laden, right? And they're much more aggressive on a global scale, whereas the Taliban kind of has more of a regional focus. Haqqani has very much a kind of a global focus and a deeper alignment in many ways with Al-Qaeda and their global aspirations. So, and then Zawahiri was the former commander of the leader of Al-Qaeda after bin Laden died, that was killed on the porch with the drone strike. But what you have is this massive intermarrying, and this was what Masood was talking about, between the bin Ladens and the Taliban. So the Al-Qaeda group and the Taliban group are intermarrying. You know, and this is a very, very key thing to pay attention to. This is what Soleimani did with the Quds forces in Iran. He had his offspring intermarrying into Hezbollah. It creates this bond that when things go south, man, it's unbreakable. And no one's paying attention to this. No one's talking about this. The fact that Osama bin Laden's son is now the emir of Al-Qaeda is a very alarming thing. And so now, with that condition in place, you not only have this open border for infiltration to happen from the south, and arguably the north, but you've also got Haqqani, who was the father of suicide bombing in Afghanistan. I mean, a very aggressive global terrorist. He's now the Minister of Interior. So he controls the passport office. So a lot of these guys that are here, they have valid passports, you know? And I've even heard from several people.
I wanted to make sure people realize this isn't like a fake ID shop in college.
Oh no, these are valid travel documents issued by the Ministry of Interior. And frankly, he's moving with impunity throughout the Middle East now. He has a $10 million bounty on his head by the United States. Yet he moves around. He just recently went to, I think, Saudi Arabia and was within miles of U.S. troops. You know, there was a time when that guy couldn't lay his head in the same place 2 nights in a row. But now he is the Minister of Interior and is issuing with impunity travel documents to folks that can come here legally and just set up shop.
You know, I think there's even another piece that nobody's really thinking about. I think about it all the time, but, you know, we're talking about We're talking about terrorist cells infiltrating the U.S., setting up sleeper cells. It's going to look like October 7th. It's going to look like the mall in Russia. It's going to look like these active shooter type attacks, probably some suicide bombing, stuff like that. But, even on top of that, if you zoom in even closer, you look at what some of the other organizations are doing that are infiltrating the country right now. The cartel.
Yeah.
Cartel, and these people aren't stupid. They're not, some of them live in caves and whatever, but I mean, we spent 20-something years there, and they're doing just fine.
Yeah.
And but what I'm getting at is, if you look at what cartel has done, they're not just setting up little base camps here and there to run drug operations. They are embedding into our politics. They are embedding into local politics, state politics, federal politics, police stations. I mean, their web is just growing.
Yeah.
I mean, I did an interview with this guy, Luis Chaparro. There was I'm going to butcher this, so I don't want to say it, but it was something involved, somebody very high up in police in California just got popped for being involved in fentanyl trafficking and connected to the cartels. Then you look at China. China also infiltrating into our country. Spies are sleeping with our politicians. There's no repercussions for that. They're also embedding into our politics. They're buying up our land. They're buying up real estate. You go to California, you see real estate signs all in Chinese. And so Taliban's going to be taking notes.
Yeah.
These terrorist organizations are going to be taking notes. They're going to start getting into our politics. They're going to start sending in intel reps. They're going to be sleeping with our politicians. And this is like the new way. And oh, you think I'm crazy? Well, guess who was there to negotiate with Taliban before the US even left? China was already negotiating with the Taliban on how they're going to pull this lithium, the lithium out of Afghanistan, and they're setting up all these different camps all over the place.
They're on Bagram right now.
See? And so you think that the CCP isn't colluding with Taliban and all the other 21 terrorist organizations?
Yeah, and that's
and maybe setting up strategigic locations side by side with China in the U.S. I mean,
I think that's why so many of the global war on terror veterans are so upset over how all this went down in Afghanistan, because the answers that we got from our politicians and the administration was things like, we're gonna get out of Afghanistan so we can focus on near peer threats.
Yeah.
The great, so as our last planes are leaving Kaya, you have cargo planes landing in Bagram offloading Chinese nationals. You have, black SUVs rolling out of vehicles on the Kaya airfield heading to the Russian embassy. So then of course we know Iran and the role that they are having in Afghanistan right now. So to me, we completely ceded the key terrain, the very place where the near peer threat is the most profound. We walked away from it. We literally walked away and don't even have an embassy there anymore to manage the near peer threat that we're dealing with. And which brings me to something that you said too, Shawn, that I think is really important. And look, I'm going to speak for me, but I've heard this from a lot of veterans as we've toured with the play and talked to people. For me, as I look at the country right now and I look at the politics of like this election and then whatever is going on with that, for me, it really is. It's not when we're talking about something like this is not a Republican, this is not a Democrat issue. I've served under commanders in chief from both parties. I know you have too. And I frankly found them all to be pretty underwhelming in their ability to prosecute this fight and their understanding in the depth of this fight. I found their policymakers and their senior admirals and generals to be woefully lacking in their command of this problem set. and at times intellectually dishonest about what was actually going on. And I just know for me right now, I have a hard time when I hear some of the stuff that's coming out of DC and when I hear some of the rhetoric around what's going on, because it is so clear what is shaping up right now. And as you've alluded to, there very well could be a level of nexus and collaboration between international criminal elements, state actors, and non-state terror groups. That could happen because they all have a vested interest in seeing us drop. And what if they do play to each other's strengths? What if Al-Qaeda is able to move, I don't know, mortar rounds across the southern border to link up with terror groups to implement Ukrainian drone technology with drones at a football game? Now, if we're sitting here thinking about this in Tennessee, that's not, I don't think it's that far-fetched. And what I've seen coming out of Afghanistan and following the congressional testimony with all, I just don't see politicians taking it seriously. I really don't. I feel like it's, or the media, I feel like it's generally the GWAT community thumping the tub and trying to get people to please listen, pay attention to this. But as a national focus, it just doesn't seem to be there.
Why do you think that is? How can you not take this seriously?
It's baffling to me because, I have a theory on it, and I don't know, but I go back to what President Bush said in the very early days of the post 9/11 attack, and I think it was when he was talking to Congress, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, this war will largely be fought in the shadows, and it will be fought by special operators and intelligence professionals, and basically what he said was, the rest of the country can go about your business. We got it. And that's exactly what happened. Even with the largest footprints that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan, at the end of the day, just over, I think, 800,000 troops from the U.S., not counting NATO, served in Afghanistan. There's 300 plus million people in this country. 800,000 served in Afghanistan over 20 years.
Wow.
Right. And so I think what you had was what this one military spouse said to me at one of our plays when we performed the play, and she stood up and she was very upset, and she said, we fought this war for 10 years, and when my husband went to war, the rest of the country went to Walmart. And so I think there's a disassociation from what this really is, and almost this idea, at least in the American population, that our special operators and our combat veterans, it's like a Fortnite game. It's like a video game. You just reset it, put them back in the game when you need them, and that it's not really that big of a deal. You just got to deal with it when it pops up. And we still kind of have this isolationist mentality. Like, let's just focus on what matters here at home. Let's get back to the economy. That's fine. But it's not like Vietnam, where you could walk away from Vietnam and really, Vietnam's got to figure it out. We've got to figure it out. This one follows us home.
Yeah.
This one follows us home. This is just a battle in a very long, multi-century struggle with these groups. This is just another round, a round won by them. But they're still coming, and they're coming at us with all 4 feet. And frankly, we're in a far worse position than pre 9/11. It's just we've deluded ourselves into thinking that we're not.
I mean, I don't even, I can't even fathom if they do this as effectively as I think they're capable of. This looks really bad.
Yeah. I told Sarah the other day, I said, there is significant blood on the hands of some leaders on the other side of this. And at a scale we've never seen. And it's just baffling. And I think it's why so many GWAT generation veterans are really, really struggling, is because the national security threat is so high. I think it's also why recruiting and retention are so bad, because the preponderance of a volunteer force is not an entitlement. It's a very fragile thing. It's a national treasure to have a volunteer force in this world we live in today. And we've squandered it. We've just pissed it away. And one of the big things that I think has happened is how much of the volunteer force is comprised of legacy warfighters that come from, they see their dad or their mom or their uncle, and they join, you know? Certainly why I joined. And I think with what happened on August of 2021, and we systemically walked away from our allies, and these young folks saw what it did to so many of our generation of warfighters, they said, you know what? I think I'm good. I think I'll pass. That's what I'm hearing anyway. It's anecdotal, but I think it's significant.
You know, what does it look like? What does it look like when it kicks off? I mean, from our response, I mean, what does it look like?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being serious.
Yeah. Right.
Who's going to save us?
Right.
Who's going to protect us?
Yeah.
We've
scary.
demoralized
Right.
police
Yep.
to the fact that they're not going to act. And I hate to say it, but you can't blame them.
Yep.
We've seen so many cops, you know, yes, there are some bad apples. Get it. But you have cut their legs out.
You've made them the enemy.
And now you see what happens.
Yep.
Now stores are getting ransacked. People are getting shot all over the place for their watches and their tennis shoes, and there aren't very many repercussions.
No.
Cops aren't going to do anything because they're demoralized. Most of the good ones have probably quit by now. You have a military where recruiting is completely down. I mean, it's on the citizens. You have politicians that don't take much of anything seriously other than, you know, daylight savings time. And because that's important, right?
Yeah.
But what does the response look like? Have you thought about that?
I have. I mean, I've talked to some of the folks that are working the problem set hard, and they're a lot smarter on it than me, but just a couple of things that I think are probably worth considering on the response.
Who are you talking to that's a lot smarter than you?
Sarah, for sure.
Okay. I'll buy that one.
Way smarter than me. And some other folks that kind of work at the state and local levels. You know, one of the things that Sarah and I are trying to do is to travel around and just talk to any state and local leaders who will listen about what is very possible, right, as a manifestation of the next terror attack. And to try to give them just threat information, updates on what's actually happening in Afghanistan, what's happening here, and different things that the way this could actually play out, what it could look like as a scenario, right? And, you know, I talked to you about the October 7th thing. I do think you're talking about complex attacks. I think you're talking about localized attacks, again, where we live, work, and play. I think, and Masood said something, I'd love to go back and look at it again, but he said something that was kind of cryptic, but yet not, when you were talking to him and you asked him something similar about what does this kind of look like? And he said, you know, Al-Qaeda's learned a lot. They've learned a lot. The Taliban have learned a lot. And ISIS-K are still very young. And it would not surprise me at all, if you ask me what it looks like, and this is some speculation, but with some synthesis, if you saw ISIS-K or some other organization on the front of it actually conducting the attack with a marionette behind it that goes all the way back to Iran and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But there's layers of plausible deniability all the way up to, you know, ISIS-K, who they could care less. You know, their mantra is to usher in the apocalypse. So they're not too worried about retribution or attribution, you know, and they've demonstrated that. They'll hit anybody. Look at what they did in Russia. Look at what they've done in Iran. Like they will be the front, I believe. And if you look at Pakistan, and Masood said this too when you interviewed him, he talked about how Pakistan, you know, they kind of made the deal with the devil, with the Taliban during the war that we were in. They funded, you know, the Taliban, and they funded these insurgent groups, these terror groups, to overthrow the Afghan government and defeat us. And they provided sanctuary to do that. Well, now that the country has fallen and the Taliban are in charge, the Pakistan has seen like a 500% increase in terror attacks against them, against the very organizations that were sponsoring these terror groups. But it's not coming from the Taliban. It's coming from surrogate groups like the Tariqi Taliban and others. But you could walk that sucker back on a whiteboard to very likely the Taliban senior leadership doing that. So there's already models for this. That's one. I think you're going to see high levels of collaboration. I do not think that ISIS-K and the Taliban are on the outs. I think that is a facade that we as Westerners have fallen for. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. I mean, they may have some ideological differences, but I think they're, and now that Haqqani has the level of assertion that he does, I think there's even in the Al-Qaeda 2.0 book, they talk about the ISIS-K leadership is now directly tied to Haqqani. But there's still this plausible deniability that could be done. It wasn't Al-Qaeda, that was ISIS. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's one that we've got to start, our politicians have, and our agencies have got to start looking at that, I think. The other one I think you see is it's the levels of attack could be so horrific and so localized that there would be an emotional overreach on the part of the United States, where the only thing we know to do is just send a bunch of 18-year-olds over there with Bradley fighting vehicles and do it again.
That's what you think the response will be? Go
Heavy.
back to Afghanistan while they're all here?
I think it'll be a heavy response because we won't know what to do. You know, there's this story about when the hijacked airliner, one of the airliners was, I think it was the one that ended up going down in Pennsylvania, but they scrambled a couple of jets out of DC. They didn't have time to put armament on them. And Penny was one of them as her first name, but they went up, and so their mission was to ram the airliner. That was what they were going to have to do. They were going to have to ram it, you know, and they got up too late. It had already happened. But I think it's a metaphor, right? Box cutters and an airliner, and you're going to get up in an F-16, you're going to ram it. Like, that's your response. And I think just based on the way we've stuck our head in the sand and doled out tax dollars to an enemy that's actually conspiring against us, how could we think our response is going to be anything except a bumbling overreach?
There's potentially so many of them here that this could just happen on and on and on. And I think the response looks, I think they're going to send people back to Afghanistan. I think the response looks very similar to the problem that we're seeing in the schools with active shooters. There is no response. There is incompetence.
It's paralysis.
There is the it's never going to happen to me attitude. We're not seeing any more funding go to protecting our schools.
Yeah.
Like, nothing's getting passed.
Right.
I mean, like I said, and it's not this isn't a political thing. You know what? Like, half the country thinks it's gun control. Guess what? Nothing's been passed. The other half thinks we need to arm the schools up and protect them, and teachers need to be carrying guns. Not much has been done.
Yeah.
You know, it's I got kids getting ready to go to school. That's the number one thing we look at in every school.
Yeah.
And I am displeased with almost everywhere I've seen.
I hear you, man. And
There is no plan.
No, you're right. And I do agree with you. I do think there will be a level of wholesale systemic paralysis in the nation when this happens. Unlike anything we've ever seen. That will make 9/11 look like, as legend says, a dress rehearsal. Like, because if just stop and think about precedent in our past where the DC sniper, 9/11, like, what did that do to the nation? Just step back and go, okay, it was significant.
Mm-hmm.
You take an October 7 style attack that happened in Israel.
They won't even be able to cover everything that's happening.
And you put it in 6 or 7 cities, because they probably could, based on the levels of infiltration they've been able to achieve and the time they've been afforded and the resources they have. There's no reason to think they couldn't execute that in 6 places across the country or more. You are talking about a level of systemic paralysis that this country has never seen. And who knows what that leads to.
I think they could be recruiting.
You certainly have evidence of gangs here now from the diaspora of Afghanistan, where there are Taliban-affiliated gangs, much like you have gangs in Minneapolis that are affiliated with Al-Shabaab. And that's very important to note as well, because once you have those, you have now tribal linkages, you have international linkages, and they're in the criminal realm as well, right? So they're narco trafficking as well, and they're tied into international gangs. So you've already got a nexus right there. you know, and there is growing evidence of Taliban affiliated gangs in the United States because of the how many 100,000 Afghans we brought over here, right? And a lot of them we don't know who they are, right? And their kids are now, you know, 17, 18 years old. There's videos out of, and there's been videos of Afghans going back to, as gang members, going back to Afghanistan and shooting videos.
Wow. Wow. Scott, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about, I think this all falls on the individual.
Yeah.